Today's account comes from a family living in Palmyra, Maine. In the year 2006, the Martin family was headed towards Maine. They had decided to move to the state after the father of the family, Eric, had injured himself and was unable to provide for the family, doing the same manual labor that he had been doing for years already. Eric had worked for the local paper mill where they had lived before coming to Maine. He had worked there for 20 years doing the same type of factory work. He enjoyed the routine of the job and appreciated the consistent nature of his employment. The family was not rich by any means, but they always had enough to keep them happy and healthy. Eric had been working at the mill on a day like any other when he injured his back while operating a piece of heavy machinery. He had blown a few discs in his back and was unable to continue working in the paper mill. Although he knew that he was unable to keep working at his normal job, Eric was defensive about his condition. He was in constant pain, but he didn't want to be coddled or taken care of. Eric grew up in an environment that was less forgiving when it came to injury, and he was accustomed to receiving no care. He was upset that he had lost his job and was not eager to feel helpless. He wanted his family to treat him normally and was sensitive when asked about how he was doing with his injury. As the family crossed the state line into Maine, Eric's wife, Shelley, asked their daughter to grab Eric's therapeutic pillow for him. Eric sharply refused the pillow and insisted that he was fine, but Shelley wasn't surprised at this reaction, but didn't know any other way to help her husband. The family kept driving to their new home. It was quiet in the car. Maine was not the Martins' family first choice when it came to settling down. Shelley had just accepted a new job in the area that would let her take care of her husband, while also keeping food on the table for the family. She was not excited about living in Palmyra, but viewed the situation as a necessary evil. It was a life change for the family. They would be living in a farm that Shelley had found a listing for in the local paper. They were excited to live on so much property and have tons of room to spread out. When they had arrived at the property, their skepticism towards their new living situation only grew. They liked the spacious fields that surrounded the house, but felt awfully secluded. They didn't have any neighbors within eyesight, and the edge of the property was surrounded by thick, dark forests. The trees seemed like a cage that held the family's new home, and the dense forest leered at the family ominously. One of the daughters of the Martin family was living with them at the time. Chelsea, whom was 17, was a little annoyed to be moving out in the middle of nowhere. She was in her last 2 weeks of school that year and was already stressed out about her finals and end-of-the-year projects that were due, and now she would be forced to pack her things and move far away from her friends that she had made. She was stressed out and tired and tried to put on a happy face when her parents asked her if she liked the new house. She had always responded politely, but her parents could see that she was less than pleased by the look on her face. Although the family was eager to get settled into their new home, they all had their reservations about how things were going to go. As Shelley watched her daughter walk into the new home, she saw Eric carrying his rifle out with him to the field, and she asked him where he was going. He sheepishly responded that he was going to go into the woods to hunt. The subject of hunting was an area of tension between the married couple. See, Eric had grown up in a hunting family, so to him, it was a way of life, and he had hunted pretty much every legal game he could. Shelley did not feel the same way. She thought that hunting was cruel and unnecessary, and did not appreciate it or like when her husband went out to hunt. Although, this point of contention rarely came up between the couple. Eric, who was always almost respectful of Shelley's wishes, even if he disagreed with her personally. Even though Eric was respectful of Shelley's wishes most of the time, he still owned an extensive arsenal of weapons that made her very nervous. She knew that her husband was a responsible gun owner, but the risk that it posed to their children seemed too great for the small benefit of owning a weapon. She did not want guns in their new house and told him that he had to go store the guns in the shed out behind the house. Their son Sean helped his father store the weapons, and they built a lockbox specifically to hold them. When they were lifting the box so it would be out of reach of the smaller children, Sean was worried about the weight of the box. He knew his father was incapacitated and worried that the strain of lifting the heavy crate would hurt him further. Eric insisted, as he always did, that he was fine, but his back could not support the weight anymore. Eric backed away and asked his son to lift the box. After a little bit of struggle, Sean was able to lift the box into an area of the shed that would make it difficult to find. Eric did not want anyone stumbling upon his arsenal and stealing his guns. So, one night, Shelley and Eric were out on the front porch, drinking coffee together. This was a ritual that they had adopted ever since they moved to Palmyra. They used the time to talk to each other and find out how they were handling the life changes that they had made. They felt that time that they had spent on the porch together kept them sane in a world that seemed to get more chaotic by the minute. While they were drinking their coffee, Shelley saw something out in the field next to the house. She asked her husband what they were looking at, and he said he had no idea what they were looking at. They looked out over the field and at a tree that stood by itself. They saw lights pulsating from behind the tree. It didn't look like a flashlight, and the couple could sense that there was something strange about the lights that they saw. The light would get really bright, almost blinding, and then it would dim down, pulsate more, and stop. Eric called out to his son on the porch to get his opinion on the lights. Sean thought they were just flashlights at first, but then he noticed that the lights seemed to change as the group looked at them more. He suggested that it was a hunting party, but he felt deep down that they were dealing with something else. After looking at the lights for a few moments, Eric suggested that they go to get a closer look at them. As Eric and his son approached the woods, they couldn't see the lights anymore, which they thought was odd, but they were so determined to find the source of the mystery that they soldiered on into the thick forest at the edge of their property. Now, the woods around their house were a little unsettling. There were shadows all over the ground as they walked deeper into the woods, and the branches of the trees hung down by the ground. It was as if the branches were hands reaching out towards them. And as the pair walked deeper into the forest, they heard the crack of a snapping branch coming from directly in front of them. The sound echoed out and continued as the pair sneaked around the forest. With every snap of a fallen branch, the two froze in place and waited to hear the sound of an animal nearby. They never heard any noise to indicate that there was any wildlife near them, and after a while, Eric suggested that the two split up. Sean protested the idea at first, but he was a brave man, and he was nervous to be out in the woods by himself. He didn't know the area well and did not want to lose himself out where he could be potentially ambushed by someone or something. Sean eventually agreed to Eric's plan, and Eric thought that there was an illegal poacher out here in the woods. He wanted to be able to sneak up on him and catch him in the act. So, as Eric went off on his own, he felt this strange feeling come over him. He felt a fear that he had never felt before in all of his years hunting. As he continued on, his panic grew more and more present. Something was out there, and he wasn't sure what it was, but he wanted to know. Still determined to find out where and what these strange lights were and where they were coming from, he continued on deeper into the forest. As he walked on, he heard something to the left of him. He froze and gained up the courage to investigate the source of the noise with his flashlight. When he shone his light at the area where the noise had come from, he saw nothing. Eric and Sean eventually met up with each other a little ways into the forest, and neither had seen anything of note. But they both remarked how eerily quiet the forest was. They could have heard a pin drop, and in all of their years hunting, no forest ever seemed to be this quiet. Everything was still around them, and they heard nothing. So they decided to look for tracks on the ground. They could not find any indication of anything being in the forest with them. No tracks from humans or animals. The pair decided to return back to the house, and neither of them were any closer to understanding where the lights had come from. Had this whole family not also seen the lights, Eric would have thought that he was going crazy. Well, the next day, Chelsea's boyfriend at the time, Nathan, came to visit the family. He had met Chelsea during the school year and would regularly come up to the family's new home to spend some time with them. He had been dating Chelsea for 6 months, and things had been going good between them. Nathan also had just recently enlisted in the army and was eager to spend as much time with Chelsea as possible before being shipped off to basic training. The couple was your typical high school couple. They enjoyed each other's company, but they would often become quiet and awkward in the presence of other people. And both Eric and Shelley liked Nathan, and they had no problem with him coming around. Although this situation was hard on everyone, The parents knew that Nathan made Shelley feel just a little bit bitter about living in Palmyra. Chelsea and Nathan decided to go check out the woods around the house. There wasn't much else to do for the young couple, so they headed out to see what they could find in the woods. They had just finished up the winter season and were eager to enjoy the sunlight while it was there. They took the 2 family dogs out with them and headed out to the field next to the house. As soon as they set foot in the field, the dogs headed straight for the woodline. This wasn't uncommon for the 2 dogs. They liked to be in the forest, but they never seemed to be as eager as they were today. They ran towards the field, and Chelsea and Nathan both thought it was as if the dogs had caught the scent of something. The couple followed the dogs into the forest and found them sniffing and barking at something in the bushes. As the couple approached the dogs, they found what they had been searching for. The dogs had found a hole in the ground near the bushes. The animals were not eager to go inside the hole and rather waited next to it, while Chelsea and Nathan took a closer look. Nathan thought that the hole looked oddly round, like it wasn't made naturally, and was dug out by some sort of animal. As Nathan examined the hole, Chelsea started to get nervous. She felt scared, like something was watching them, as her boyfriend examined the hole in the ground. She even asked Nathan if they could leave, and he left with her. The couple both had this eerie feeling inside of them that they couldn't shake. Something about the woods around their house really creeped them out, and they decided they wouldn't go out there anymore. The couple returned to the house and forgot all about their strange encounters with this hole. Well, a few weeks later, on Memorial Day, the family was settling in for the night. Chelsea had gone up to her room already to sleep, and the parents were gearing up to go to bed themselves. It seemed like any other night of the week to the family, but by this point, they had already warmed up to their new home, and even found a certain charm associated with the small farmhouse. They felt they were at home in Palmyra now and were finally adjusted to the change they had made just a few weeks earlier. After a little while of lying in bed, Eric and Shelley found themselves unable to sleep, so they decided to head out onto the porch and drink some tea to relax themselves. The couple looked out over the field, and keep in mind it was a misty night, a little cold, but nothing the pair could not handle. They sat out on the porch and enjoyed the scenery around them and each other's company, drinking their tea and talking about whatever had crossed their minds. They enjoyed this time together and were happy to get some alone time as a couple. As they talked about the next day ahead of them, they noticed something strangely familiar. It was an extremely quiet night. They couldn't hear the noises of the animals that usually surrounded their house. They could always hear sheep and horses in the distance while they sat out on the porch for their nightly talks, but tonight, they couldn't hear a single other living creature besides themselves. The couple sat together, unnerved by this unusual quiet around them. Shelley shone her flashlight into the darkness around them, but they didn't see anything out of the ordinary. She went back to the conversation they were having before, dismissing the odd stillness around them as something insignificant. Eric was still focused on the absence of noise around them. He didn't know what it was, but something inside of him told him that there was danger nearby. All of a sudden, Eric sprung up from his chair and grabbed his wife. He told her that they needed to get back inside the house now. The eerie feeling that was bubbling inside Eric was now a full-blown panic. Shelley asked why Eric was so insistent that they head into the house. She tried to pull away from him, but Eric persisted. He was unable to explain why they needed to get into the house, but Shelley could tell it was important. As the panic grew in Eric's voice, the couple heard a rustling noise in the bushes right around them. At this point, Shelley shone her flashlight in the direction of the noise, and they saw something out in the yard. They saw 3 sets of glowing eyes looking at them. And in that moment, Eric's hunter instincts immediately recognized the eyes as wolves. They looked around the rest of the yard and saw another pair of eyes. The Martin family was now surrounded by a pack of ravenous wolves, and they did not know what to do. The fear inside the couple was reaching a boiling point. Sherry was no longer determined to stay out of the porch, and the couple ran back indoors, locking the door behind them. They knew that they were running for their lives at this point, and when the couple ran back inside, Shelley shone the light through the window. The wolves were right at the door, clawing at the handle to find a way in. Eric tried to get his wife to retreat back into the room and take cover, but she wanted to know what the threat was that they were facing. So as the couple sat on the floor next to the door, Eric told his wife that he needed his guns. She rebuked him, not wanting to have their usual argument about weapons in the house while they were panicked and scared. But Eric took the opportunity to explain to his wife that it was moments like these that made him want to keep his guns in the house. She rolled her eyes and refused to argue with him. Eric was confused as to what to do and what was outside his door. At first, he thought they were wolves, but they seemed too large to be any wolf that he'd ever seen. He thought they might have been bears, but he had seen many bears, and bears don't look like creatures now clawing their way into his house. Eric was scared, and he didn't even have a weapon on him. He didn't even know if his own family was safe in the house. For all he knew, these wolves outside could break down the door and attack his wife and kids. Shelley told her husband that she was going to go check on the daughter sleeping upstairs, and Eric told her about his plan that he had just now formulated. He said that he was going to go outside to get the guns. Shelley was shocked by this plan. I mean, she knew that neither of them knew what was outside their house, and she feared that Eric would get killed or mauled if he had wandered outside the safety of their home. She scolded Eric, and he relented. When Shelley got up to Chelsea's room, she noticed the window above her daughter's head and quickly ran and closed the door, waking up her daughter. Chelsea was annoyed at first, not knowing what was going on, when Shelley told her that she needed to go see what was going on. The two stood at the window, looking over the front of the house. When they looked outside, they could see several of these creatures in the fog around the house. Chelsea was not interested in these things. However, she thought that they looked like any other wolf she had seen, and she was eager to get back to bed. She told her mother to let her know what happened when she woke up the next morning and went right back to sleep. Shelley was shocked. I mean, she couldn't believe that her daughter had such a small reaction to what had seemed to her to be an unexplainable event. Shelley had kept watching the creatures through Chelsea's window, and while Shelley was observing the creatures, she noticed them all in a group sort of in a distance away from the house. As she looked at the creatures, one of them stood up on its hind legs. The creature that Shelley was looking at was massive. It looked to be about 7 feet tall and seemed to be pretty comfortable walking bipedally. The creature stared at Shelley through the window, and Shelley just felt chills running down her spine. If Shelley wasn't convinced that her family was in danger before, she was sure now. Eric, who was still downstairs, pacing back and forth, while he had agreed with his wife regarding the guns earlier, he was beginning to rethink his plans. He needed to protect his family, and to him, the only way to do that was if he was heavily armed. He looked out the window at the creature and saw that they were off a little ways from the house. He began thinking about if he could just make it to his car before the creature spotted him. He planned to back his car up to the house so his wife and daughter could easily climb in. Then he would simply drive off with his family and escape the whole sticky situation they were in. Eric knew he had to make a decision, and he decided to act now. So he opens the door and heads right outside. Now, during this time, Shelley went around closing all the windows in the house. She called out for the dogs, realizing that she had not heard them barking or making any noise. Eric had left the house and was now on the front porch. He could see that these creatures were moving away from the house and decided to make his move. He crept towards his car. It was only about 30 feet away from him, but to him, that 30 feet was like miles. Shelley, who was still inside, was calling out to the dogs. It was very strange for them not to come to her. They were very well trained dogs, and they always came running whenever any member of the Martin family called out to them. She walked to each room of the house, and there were no sign of the dogs anywhere. So when she walked into the kitchen, she could feel something walking around near her. She found one of the windows open in a nearby bedroom, and she froze in fear. Shelley crept towards the window, holding her breath with every step. And as she approached the window, she reached out, shut it tight, and looked over at the ground next to her and saw her 2 dogs sitting on the ground. They looked scared to death. The Martin family dogs were both hunting dogs, and they never seemed to be scared of anything. So Shelley was shocked at the frightened looks that the dogs gave her. She locked the window, going back into the kitchen. At this point, Eric was still making his way towards his car, and the stress of the situation caused his back to be in more pain than usual and was practically limping towards his vehicle, making him virtually easy prey. He pulled out his keys, unlocked the door, and as he did, the floodlight overhead turned on, shocking Eric, exposing him. During his panic, he had forgotten all about the motion sensor activated light that he had installed above his car, and he drops his keys to the ground and begins to panic. He was now completely exposed and was in plain view for these things to see. As he bends down to pick up the keys, he hears a low, growling sound coming from the other side of his vehicle. He lifts up his head and saw one of these creatures staring at him eye to eye. The two looked at each other for a few moments, and Eric was sure that he was about to be attacked and mauled. But surprisingly, this beast runs back into the darkness. Eric saw how fast this thing moved and knew that using the car to run away from them would simply not work, and he decided his best bet was to head back to the house. Shelley, at this time, had no idea that Eric had even gone outside and was now looking for her husband. She called out to him a few times and got no response, and so she circled her way back to the front door and heard it slam open and saw Eric coming to scramble inside. Now she was pissed. She knew that it was dangerous outside and didn't want to think about what would happen if any of these things had somehow gotten a hold of Eric. So she scolded him for a minute, but then felt glad that he was safe. The couple began planning what their next move would be. They decided to call the police, so Shelley picks up the phone, calls 911, and talks to the operator, but of course, they weren't believing their story. They were convinced that the Martin family was somehow surrounded by a harmless animal and simply advised the family to stay inside. Shelley protested, but the officer hung up on her and left the couple to figure things out on their own. The family felt like hostages in their own home at this point. They could not leave. They were worried that these creatures would somehow find their way into the home. Shelley went back upstairs to check on Chelsea and Eric as they sat on the couch. He was frustrated by the whole situation. There seemed to be nothing that the family could do to protect themselves at this point. Then, Eric began to think about his encounter with one of the creatures just a few moments earlier. He noticed that the creatures seemed to be afraid of the light. He didn't know whether the light hurt their eyes or if they simply just couldn't go near it, but he knew that the light had some sort of effect. Eric decided to go out to the shed and get his guns back, using a flashlight. He kept his plan secret from Shelley because he knew that she wouldn't approve of his idea. As Eric walked towards the shed, his whole body was hurting. He knew that he could trip the motion sensor for the garage light and planned to stay in the light as a sort of protection for him. As the light shone down on Eric, he could now see that he was completely surrounded by what he initially thought were wolves, but now were something else entirely. The animals looked like they were about to pounce on Eric, and he prepared himself for the final fight of his life. He decided to leave the protection of the light and run back towards the house. And as soon as he left the protection that the garage light gave him, these creatures gave chase, running after him. Eric ran as fast as he could for the door and managed to make it back inside before these things got to him. And Shelley found him downstairs. The two sat back on the couch, the couple feeling completely helpless. They didn't have any guns, they had no way to get help, and they had no idea of how to get themselves out of the situation that they were in. So Shelley decides to run upstairs and wake Chelsea and told her that they were in danger and they need to find some way to protect themselves. This was not a normal situation. Things were bad. The family decides to hide in Eric and Shelley's room and just simply wait for the sunrise. What other options did they have? So the family waited for what seemed like an eternity, and after a little while of lying in bed, the family heard a familiar growl, the same creatures that were outside, but now they were right outside the bedroom window. As the family listened to the creature outside their window, Eric had tried his best to reassure his family. He told them everything would be fine. Eric wasn't even sure if he believed what he was saying himself, but he was determined to calm and protect his family. The family heard the creature scratch at the window, and after what seemed like hours, the sun finally began to rise, and they all breathed a sigh of relief. When the next day came, the family heard no trace of the creatures they had heard the night before. Eric went out to look for any signs that the creatures had been there. He found several large footprints all around the house. The footprints looked like they came from two-legged creatures, or bipedal animals, and Eric knew they belonged to these monsters that had stalked them the night before. After this experience, the Martin family, they were afraid to spend another night here. Every night they spent there was filled with complete anxiety and dread. But these creatures never came back. The Martin family was free from the creatures that had stalked them so carefully the night before. They were relieved to not be in danger any longer. Eric and Shelley Martin still don't know what attacked them that night in Palmyra. They insist that the creatures simply do not fit any description of local wildlife, and they maintain the truthfulness of their encounter to this day. It seems as though the family was stalked by creatures resembling the Dogman or, dare I say, werewolf. If this is true, then the family is lucky to have made it through. Thank you all for watching this video, and feel free to leave any comments about what the family may have seen below, and make sure to share your own personal experiences with the unexplained creatures, whether that be in a comment or sending it to stories@whatlurksbeneath.com. If you enjoyed tonight's video, be sure to go ahead and slap that like button and leave a comment down below. Also, if you're new to the channel, be sure to go ahead and hit that subscribe button and keep your notifications on so that way YouTube will let you know every time I release a great new video. And as always, my friends, stay safe, and I'll see you all in the very next video.